The screen reveals the Coliseo, stark in its ruined glory as epic, sinister music begins. Quick cuts show ancient Roman coins, some gleaming, others seemingly blood-soaked. These are not just relics, they are whispers of an empire built on power and shrouded in secrets. Rome's dark legacy endures. Roma, un imperio de gladiadores, emperadores y secretos que nunca debieron salir a la luz. Hoy exploraremos 3 maldiciones reales vinculadas a la antigua Roma, que aún hoy afectan a quienes se cruzan en su camino. ¿Crees en el poder de una maldición? Porque después de esto, quizá no vuelvas a ver un símbolo romano de la misma forma. A sword unsheathes, a drum beats the past calls. We now confront these terrifying legacies. The stories you are about to hear are grim warnings from a bygone era, speaking of ancient wrath that never truly sleeps. Our first tale of Roman horror begins now, a chilling reminder of its undying power. Our first story takes us back to 1982, to the ash-choked ruins of Pompeii. An archaeological team was meticulously working, sifting through layers of volcanic debris. Among the excavators was a seasoned archaeologist, a man of science, skeptical by nature, yet with a deep reverence for the past. As his trowel scraped against something solid, he felt a familiar thrill, but this time it was accompanied by an uncharacteristic chill. He carefully brushed away the compacted ash and soil, revealing a glint of gold. It was a coin, remarkably preserved. On its surface, the unmistakable profile of Emperor Nero. The craftsmanship was exquisite. The gold almost seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. That evening, back in his modest lodgings, the archaeologist examined the coin more closely. A thought, perhaps born of pride or a collector's instinct, crossed his mind. He would keep it, just for a little while. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling its weight as a comforting presence. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was a restless, tormented slumber. He found himself in a vast, shadowy Colosseum, the air thick with the smell of smoke and something else. Something acrid and terrifying. The stands were filled with silent spectral figures, their eyes fixed on him. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that gripped his very soul. Then from the center of the arena, a figure emerged, wreathed in roaring orange flames. The heat was intense, even in the dream, searing his skin. The burning man raised a charred hand, pointing directly at him. Though his features were obscured by the inferno that consumed him, the archaeologist felt an ancient, malevolent intelligence in his gaze. A voice, raspy and filled with unimaginable agony and rage, echoed through the dreamscape. "Devuélvala," it shrieked. "It is not yours to keep. Return what was stolen." He awoke with a violent gasp, drenched in cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream was so vivid, so terrifyingly real, that for a moment he couldn't distinguish it from reality. The smell of smoke still seemed to linger in his nostrils. He fumbled for the light, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He had to check. He had to make sure the coin was still there, that it was all just a nightmare. His hand darted to the pocket of the trousers he'd worn the previous day. His fingers closed not around cold metal, but around something soft, gritty. He pulled his hand out and stared in disbelief. In his palm there was no gold coin, only a small pile of fine grey ashes. The coin, Nero's coin, had vanished. In its place, this unsettling, almost symbolic residue. A wave of nausea washed over him. The following days were a blur of anxiety and growing paranoia for the archaeologist. He told no one of his experience, fearing ridicule. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the lingering scent of smoke, or the faint, almost imperceptible sensation of heat on his skin at odd moments. Just a few days later, the unthinkable happened. Colleagues, concerned by his prolonged absence, went to check on him at his lodgings. They found him in his study, slumped over his desk, dead. The official cause of death was a sudden heart attack, but there was something else, something the official report didn't emphasize. On his hands, clearly visible, were angry red marks like fresh burns, as if he had desperately tried to grasp something scorching hot. The story doesn't end there. Our second tale of Roman curses takes us to the Colosseum in Rome. In 2015, a group of young tourists ventured into its less visited subterranean levels. These are the Hypogeum, the labyrinthine network of tunnels and chambers that once lay beneath the arena floor. The air in these underground passages is heavy, cool, and carries the scent of damp stone and something else, an almost palpable sense of sorrow and ancient fear. The group, armed with smartphones to capture their adventure, moved deeper into the gloom. They came upon a particular section of wall, far from the main tourist paths, covered in ancient graffiti. As one of the tourists, a young woman named Sophia, brought her phone closer to film these time-worn markings, the group fell silent. It was then that they heard it. Not a distant echo, not a trick of the wind, but a clear, distinct voice, seemingly coming from the very stones in front of them. It was a single Latin word, spoken in a low, urgent whisper. "Fuge, flee, run." The word hung in the air, cold and sharp, cutting through the silence of the catacombs. They looked at each other, faces pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Sophia's phone was still recording. Later, when they reviewed the footage, their blood ran cold. As the word "fuge" was whispered, the camera, pointed at the graffitied wall, captured something impossible. For a fleeting second, a shadowy silhouette seemed to detach itself from the stone, the distinct outline of a figure in what looked like Roman legionary armor, before melting back into the wall as if it were water. It was there, then it was gone, too quick for the naked eye, but undeniably captured by the lens. One of the group, a young man named Marco, perhaps emboldened by bravado or driven by a skeptical curiosity, reached out and touched the wall where the shadow had appeared. He later said he felt an intense, icy coldness emanate from the stone, a cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. He pulled his hand back quickly, a sudden sharp pain shooting up his arm. He cried out, clutching his forearm. When he looked, his skin was inflamed, and already angry red welts were rising. But these were no ordinary marks. As his friends watched in horror, the welts began to form distinct patterns, shapes that looked unnervingly like ancient runic symbols or perhaps ligatures from a forgotten script. They were like brands, seared into his flesh, intricate and deeply unsettling. Chapter 3. La Estatua que Parpadea. And now we come to our third and perhaps most unsettling account, a story that suggests even the stoic representations of Roman deities are not immune to the inexplicable. This incident reportedly took place as recently as 2020 at the esteemed Roman Museum in London. Our focus is on a night guard, a man accustomed to the silent companionship of relics from ages past. Museums at night possess a unique atmosphere, don't they? The exhibits, usually surrounded by crowds and daylight, take on a different character in the echoing silence and dim emergency lighting. Statues seem to watch you, ancient tools hum with forgotten purposes. For this particular guard, his nightly patrols were usually uneventful, a routine of checking locks and ensuring all was as it should be. Until, that is, he began to notice something profoundly disturbing about one specific exhibit. The exhibit in question was a life-sized marble statue of Jupiter, king of the Roman gods. Majestic, imposing, its stone eyes fixed in a regal, unseeing gaze, or so it should have been. The guard started to get the unnerving feeling that the statue's eyes weren't always fixed. Sometimes on his rounds he'd catch a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye, a subtle shift he'd initially dismiss as fatigue or a trick of the light. But the feeling persisted, grew stronger. He began to pay closer attention to the Jupiter statue. He'd make a point of noting the exact position of its sculpted pupils. More than once he swore they had moved, ever so slightly, from when he had last checked. He mentioned it tentatively to a colleague, who laughed it off, suggesting he was spending too much time alone with the old gods. But the guard knew what he was seeing, or at least, what he thought he was seeing. Determined to get to the bottom of it, or perhaps to prove his own sanity, he made an official report. He stated quite plainly that he believed the statue of Jupiter was moving its eyes. As you can imagine, this was met with considerable skepticism by the museum authorities. However, to placate him, or perhaps out of a sliver of curiosity themselves, they agreed to review the security footage from the hall where Jupiter stood. What the recordings revealed shocked everyone. Each night, at precisely 3 a.m., an hour often associated with heightened supernatural activity, the statue's eyes would indeed move. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical turn of the head, but something far more subtle and infinitely more creepy. The statue would blink. Its heavy marble eyelids would slowly lower, then raise again. And more disturbingly, its gaze appeared to follow the path of any late-working staff or security personnel who happened to pass by. The footage was undeniable. The stone was alive, or at least animated by some unseen force. The museum authorities were now faced with an inexplicable phenomenon. Explanations ranging from subtle vibrations to elaborate hoaxes were considered and dismissed. The guard, once doubted, was now at the center of a baffling and terrifying mystery. He dreaded his nightly encounters with the watchful deity. The guard became increasingly unnerved. The feeling of being watched by those cold marble eyes, now confirmed to be mobile, was almost unbearable. He felt a palpable intelligence emanating from the statue, ancient and powerful. He grew desperate for a solution, for some way to appease whatever entity had taken up residence within the stone form of Jupiter. He researched old Roman customs, seeking a way to pacify an offended god. In his research, he learned of the Roman practice of leaving offerings, food, wine, incense, to gain favor from the gods or to placate their anger. It seemed a long shot, a superstitious act in a modern world, but he was willing to try anything. He decided he would leave an offering of wine, a traditional gift to Jupiter, hoping it might bring an end to the nightly disturbances. One evening, before the dreaded 3 a.m. hour, the guard nervously approached the statue. He carried a small, earthenware cup filled with red wine. With a trembling hand, he placed the cup on the plinth at Jupiter's feet. He even uttered a quiet, respectful plea in his own words, asking for peace and for the disturbances to cease. He then retreated, his heart pounding, to observe from a safe distance via the security monitors. The hours ticked by. 3 a.m. arrived. The camera lingers on the stone face of the Jupiter statue, its gaze cold and knowing. Tense strings underscore the unsettling feeling that the past is not merely history, but a living presence. The stories shared tonight are stark reminders. Rome's grandeur was intertwined with dark rituals and potent beliefs, echoes of which still resonate with a terrifying clarity, suggesting some forces never truly fade away with time. Estas maldiciones nos recuerdan que el pasado nunca está realmente muerto. Si alguna vez ves un objeto romano, piénsalo 2 veces antes de tocarlo, y si escuchas un susurro en latín, corre. A long coin, bearing Nero's profile, spins towards the viewer before the screen plunges into darkness. A message appears. ¿Te atreves a compartir tu experiencia con lo sobrenatural? Comenta #Roma Maldita. For more journeys into the unknown, subscribe to our channel. The shadows are always waiting to tell their tales.